I still remember the exact moment I realized my son had sold my beloved beach house for just $500. The sting was sharper than the cold Atlantic wind biting through my thin sweater that afternoon. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife I'd ever felt. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Marie, and I'm 73 years old. For the past decade, I've lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. The walls are thin, the neighbors are loud, and the radiator clanks like an angry ghost every winter morning. But none of that compared to the silence that had settled over my life like a heavy blanket. That morning started like any other. I shuffled to my small kitchen window, the same ritual I'd performed for years. Outside, the city bustled with life while I prepared another cup of coffee that would grow cold before I finished it. My arthritic fingers fumbled with the phone, dialing the number I knew by heart. "Hi, sweetheart," I said when my daughter Jessica picked up. "Are we still on for this weekend? I thought we could drive out to the beach house together." The pause that followed felt eternal. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice carried that familiar coldness that had become her signature tone with me. "Mom, we're busy. Maybe next time." Just like that. No explanation. No apology. Just a door slamming shut on another weekend I'd spend alone. I set the phone down with trembling hands and walked to my living room. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. Pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, graduation ceremonies. In every single one, I was there. Smiling. Supporting. Giving everything I had. The beach house in Rockaway had been my sanctuary for over 30 years. Every morning there, I would shuffle to the window and hear the saltwater crash against the shore. The briny air would mix with the scent of fading pine from the nearby forest, creating a perfume that meant home to me. But lately, even thinking about that place filled me with a hollow ache. I pulled out an old photo album from the shelf. The cracked leather spine smelled like decades of memories. My fingers, spotted with age and marked by years of hard work, trembled as I turned the pages. There were the summers at the beach. My children's laughter echoing under the sun. My son David burying seashells in the sand, his gap-toothed grin bright as the summer sky. When had everything changed? When did my babies become strangers who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience? The phone rang, startling me from my memories. It was David, my youngest. He was 38 now, but his voice still carried that desperate edge I'd grown to dread. "Hey, Mom," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need to talk to you about something important." My heart clenched. With David, important always meant expensive. "What is it, honey?" "I'm in a bit of a jam. The business isn't doing well, and I need some help. Just temporary, you know? Until things turn around." I closed my eyes. How many times had I heard these exact words? How many checks had I written, believing that this time would be different? "How much?" I whispered. $5,000. "I know it's a lot, but Mom, I'm desperate. If you don't help me, I don't know what I'll do." $5,000. Nearly half of my monthly Social Security check. But the quiver in his voice, the way he said he was desperate, it pulled at every maternal instinct I had left. "I'll transfer it tomorrow," I heard myself saying. "You're the best, Mom. I love you." The line went dead before I could say I loved him too. That night, I sat in my armchair, listening to the sounds of the city through my thin walls. Sirens wailed in the distance. A couple argued in the apartment above. Someone's television blared a late-night talk show. But inside my little space, there was only silence and the weight of my own thoughts. I thought about my husband, Robert. He'd been gone for 10 years now, but I still missed his steady presence. He would have known what to do about the children. He'd always been better at saying no, at setting boundaries I was too soft to maintain. After Robert died, I threw myself into being everything for David and Jessica. I worked double shifts at Murphy's Diner in Queens, my feet swelling in cheap shoes, my back aching from carrying heavy trays. I cooked dinners large enough to feed an army, hoping to drown their grief in comfort food. I wrote check after check from the beach house's rental income to cover their college tuitions, their car payments, their rent. "Mom, I need money again," became David's favorite greeting. The words always came with that shadow of desperation in his voice, but delivered so casually it felt like a slap each time. I would hesitate, my hand hovering over my checkbook, but family meant sacrifice, didn't it? That's what I'd been taught. That's what I believed. When I questioned his choices, cold silences would fill our conversations like ice water. "You don't understand, Mom," he'd snap, before disappearing into another one of his mysterious business ventures that never quite worked out. Jessica was different but equally draining. Her manipulation came wrapped in tears and dramatic declarations. "Mom, you're the only one who truly understands me," she'd say when she needed something. But when I needed her, when I was sick or lonely or just wanted to hear her voice, she was always too busy. My forgiveness became a leash around my own neck. I enabled their selfishness because I was terrified of losing them completely. But maybe, I was starting to realize, I'd already lost them long ago. The next few months blurred together in a haze of forgotten birthdays and ignored phone calls. When I turned 73 in March, no cards arrived. No flowers. No call. Just a text from Jessica with a string of birthday emojis that felt more insulting than silence would have been. When I caught pneumonia last winter, I spent 3 days in the hospital alone. My phone lay silent on the bedside table like a dead thing. Jessica was too busy with work. David forgot I was sick, though I'd left him 2 voicemails from my hospital bed. The nurses were kinder to me than my own children had been in years. I was released on a Tuesday morning, and I took a taxi back to my empty apartment. The silence felt different now. Colder. Emptier. It pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. That's when I decided to spend a few days at the beach house. Maybe the ocean air would clear my head. Maybe the familiar rhythm of the waves would remind me who I used to be before I became just a dispensary for my children's endless needs. I took the subway to Rockaway Beach, my overnight bag heavy on my shoulder. The March air was still cold, but I could smell spring trying to break through winter's grip. The beach house sat on a quiet street, just 2 blocks from the water. It was a small, weathered cottage with blue shutters and a front porch that faced the sea. I'd bought it 35 years ago with Robert, back when Rockaway was still affordable for a diner waitress and a construction worker. We'd scraped together every penny for the down payment, dreaming of weekend getaways and retirement mornings watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. Now it stood as the only valuable thing I owned besides my memories. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately: dusty, closed-up air mixed with the lingering salt breeze that never quite left. I opened windows, letting March wind blow through rooms that had been holding their breath all winter. This was my sanctuary. My refuge. The place where I could still feel Robert's presence, where memories of my children's laughter lived in every corner. I spent 2 peaceful days there, walking the beach, reading old books, cooking simple meals for one. It felt like meditation, like healing. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without worry gnawing at my dreams. But all sanctuaries, I was about to learn, can be violated. I returned to Queens refreshed, almost hopeful. The apartment didn't feel quite as oppressive. The silence didn't press quite as hard against my chest. I was sorting through mail that had piled up while I was away when I found it. A manila envelope from the county clerk's office. My hand shook as I opened it, assuming it was something routine about property taxes. Instead, I found a deed transfer document. My beach house had been sold. For $500. The buyer's name was unfamiliar: Michael Castellano. The signature authorizing the sale was David's, written in his messy scrawl across a power of attorney document I'd never seen before. My legs gave out. I sank into my kitchen chair, the papers scattered across the table like evidence of my own murder. $500. 35 years of mortgage payments. 35 years of memories. 35 years of Roberts and my dreams, sold for less than I spent on groceries in a month. I called David immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone numbers. "David, what have you done?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Mom? What are you talking about?" "The beach house, David. You sold my beach house." A pause. Then, that familiar tone of practiced innocence. "Oh, that. Mom, I can explain. It's complicated." "Complicated? You sold my home for $500. It wasn't really a sale, Mom. It was more like collateral. I needed to secure a loan, and Michael said he'd help me out. It's temporary. I'll buy it back." Every word felt like a stone thrown at my chest. "Without asking me? Without telling me? You would have worried for nothing. I'm handling it. That house is all I have left of your father." "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a house. Just a house." Those 3 words ended something inside me. Not just the conversation, but something fundamental about who I thought I was and who I thought I was raising. That night, I sat in my kitchen and cried until I had no tears left. Then I sat in the silence that followed, staring at those papers spread across my table like autopsy results. I thought about calling Jessica, but what was the point? She'd either defend her brother or find a way to make it my fault. I'd become an expert at predicting my children's responses to my pain over the years. Instead, I made tea with shaking hands. As I lifted the cup, my arthritis flared, and I dropped it. The porcelain shattered against my linoleum floor in a crash that echoed through my empty apartment. I stared at the broken pieces, white shards scattered like my broken trust, and something shifted in my chest. The crushing weight of betrayal transformed into something harder, more focused. Anger. For the first time in years, I let myself feel genuinely angry at my children. Not disappointed. Not hurt. Angry. I swept up the pieces and threw them away, then sat back down at my table. For hours, I stared at those legal documents, reading every word, trying to understand how my own son had managed to steal my sanctuary from under me. The power of attorney was dated 6 months ago. I remembered that day now. David had come over, unusually affectionate, talking about how he worried about me managing my affairs alone as I got older. "Just sign this, Mom," he'd said. "It's just in case something happens to you. So I can help take care of things." I'd trusted him. God help me, I'd trusted him completely. Over the next few days, I made calls. To lawyers, to the county clerk, to anyone who might help me understand what had happened and whether I could fix it. The news wasn't good. The sale was legal. David had used the power of attorney to authorize the transaction. Getting the house back would mean a lengthy court battle that would cost more money than I had. But surely, I said to the lawyer I finally managed to consult, a sale for $500 proves something suspicious happened. The lawyer, a tired-looking woman about Jessica's age, shook her head. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Morrison, family members often sell property between themselves for nominal amounts for various reasons. Unless you can prove fraud or duress, the sale stands." I walked home from that appointment in a daze. The subway felt suffocating, full of people rushing toward lives that made sense to them. I felt like I was floating outside reality, watching my life collapse from a distance. Back in my apartment, I called David again. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "Mom, I told you, I'm handling it." "No, David. We need to talk in person. Today." Something in my voice must have reached him because he agreed to come over that evening. While I waited, I sat with my photo albums again. But this time, instead of wallowing in nostalgia, I looked at the pictures differently. I saw myself in every photo, always giving, always supporting, always there. But where were David and Jessica in my times of need? I found pictures from Robert's funeral. There I was, supported by friends and neighbors, while David stood off to the side checking his phone. Jessica had left early, claiming she couldn't handle the emotion. Picture after picture told the same story. My presence was constant in their lives. Theirs was conditional in mine. David arrived at 7. He looked older than his 38 years, his hair thinning, his face carrying the stress lines of someone perpetually scrambling to catch up with life. "Mom, you look upset." "Sit down, David." He perched on the edge of my couch like he was ready to bolt at any moment. "I want you to explain to me exactly what happened with my house." He launched into a complicated story about business loans and collateral and temporary arrangements. But I heard the practiced quality in his voice, the way he'd rehearsed this explanation. "Who is Michael Castellano?" I interrupted. "A business associate. He's helping me out by buying my house for $500. "Mom, you don't understand business. This is how these things work." "Then make me understand. Help me understand how stealing your mother's house is how business works." His face flushed. "I didn't steal anything." "Jesus, Mom, you're so dramatic. I'm trying to build something here, and you act like I'm some kind of criminal. You sold my house without my knowledge or permission. You gave me power of attorney to help me if I got sick, not to sell my property behind my back." We stared at each other across my small living room. In that moment, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as my little boy who needed protection, but as a grown man who had chosen to betray me. "I need you to get it back," I said quietly. "I can't just get it back, Mom. It's not that simple." "Then make it simple." "It's going to take time. Maybe a few months." "How many months?" He shrugged. "I don't know. A year? Maybe longer." "A year. Maybe longer." My 73-year-old heart couldn't wait a year for maybe. "David, that house is all I have left of your father. It's my only valuable possession. It was supposed to be my security in old age." "Mom, you worry too much about money. You've got your Social Security, your little savings account. You're fine." My little savings account. The one I'd been draining to support him for years. "I want you to leave now," I said. "Mom, don't be like this. I want you to leave, and I want you to think about what you've done. Really think about it." After he left, I sat in my chair and stared at the wall. The apartment felt different somehow. Quieter, but also cleaner. Like an infection had been lanced. I called Jessica that night and told her what her brother had done. Her response was predictable. "Mom, you're probably misunderstanding something. David wouldn't do that." When I read her the legal documents over the phone, she went quiet. Well, she finally said, maybe he had a good reason. Did you ask him why he needed to do it? Jessica, he stole my house. That's a strong word, Mom. We're family. Family helps each other. When have either of you helped me? Another pause. That's not fair. We help you all the time. How? When? We call you. We visit. You call when you need money. You visit when you need something. When was the last time either of you asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answer? Mom, you're being very hurtful right now. Being hurtful. By pointing out the truth about our relationship, I was being hurtful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to the city sounds through my thin walls and thinking about patterns. The pattern of David's emergencies always coinciding with my payday. The pattern of Jessica's emotional crises arriving whenever I mentioned taking trips or spending money on myself. The pattern of my own enabling that had created monsters out of the babies I'd loved so completely. At 3 in the morning, I got up and made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. Assets, my small savings account, my social security, my older brother Frank in Florida who still called me every Sunday. Debts, none, thankfully. Resources, my neighbor Mrs. Chen who'd been consistently kind to me. The lawyer I'd consulted. My own stubborn streak that Robert used to joke about. Options, I could spend my remaining years being angry and betrayed, or I could figure out how to rebuild something worth living for. I chose rebuilding. The next morning, I called the lawyer again. Mrs. Morrison, I told you, getting the house back through court would be expensive and uncertain. What if I don't want it back? A pause. I'm not sure I understand. What if I want to make sure this never happens again? What if I want to protect what I have left? She scheduled another appointment for that afternoon. By the end of that meeting, I had revoked David's power of attorney, created a new will that left everything to charities, and begun the process of protecting my remaining assets from future manipulation. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Morrison? The lawyer asked. These are significant changes. I'm sure. That evening, I called both of my children and told them what I'd done. David exploded. You can't be serious. I made one mistake, and you're cutting me off forever. One mistake? David, you've been taking advantage of me for years. The house was just the final straw. I needed help. That's what family does. Family is supposed to be reciprocal. When have you ever helped me? Jessica tried a different approach, tears and emotional manipulation. Mom, without us, what do you have? We're your legacy. We're all that's left of you and Dad. My legacy isn't what I gave you. It's what I built despite your attempts to tear it down. The calls ended badly, with threats and tears and accusations. I sat in my quiet apartment afterward, feeling empty but also relieved. Like a pressure I'd been carrying for years had finally been released. The next few weeks were hard. Both children tried different tactics. David showed up at my apartment drunk one night, pounding on my door and shouting about ungrateful mothers. I called building security. Jessica sent long, rambling emails about childhood memories and how much they loved me and how I was destroying the family. I deleted them unread after the first few. But something unexpected began happening. Without the constant drain of their demands, their crises, their emotional manipulation, I started sleeping better. I started eating regular meals instead of picking at food while worrying about David's latest emergency. I started remembering who I used to be. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, knocked on my door one afternoon with a plate of homemade dumplings. You look different, she said, studying my face with sharp eyes. Lighter somehow. Mrs. Chen was 85 and had immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago. Her English was accented but precise, and her ability to see through nonsense was remarkable. I've made some changes, I told her. Good changes, I think. Your children, they drain you. I see them come and go. Always taking. Never giving. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what I'd been feeling for years. Would you like to have tea sometime? She asked. Not because you need something. Just because. Just because. When was the last time someone had wanted to spend time with me just because? We began having tea together twice a week. Mrs. Chen told me stories about her life in Taiwan, her journey to America, raising 4 children who now called her regularly and visited monthly. She showed me pictures of grandchildren who sent her cards and videos from college. How did you raise children who actually care about you? I asked one afternoon. She considered the question seriously. I love them completely, but I never let them grow up thinking love means getting everything they want. Love sometimes means saying no. I had never learned to say no. But I was learning now. David tried calling once a week for the first month, usually asking for money. I stopped answering. Jessica sent increasingly frantic texts about family bonds and forgiveness. I blocked her number. The silence in my apartment changed character. Instead of oppressive, it became peaceful. Instead of lonely, it felt clean. 3 months after I discovered the house sale, I did something I hadn't done in years. I used some of my savings to take a weekend trip. Not to see family. Not to handle someone else's crisis. Just for me. I took the train to Boston and stayed in a small hotel near the harbor. I walked the Freedom Trail, ate clam chowder, visited museums. I talked to strangers about art and history instead of other people's problems. On the train ride home, I realized I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy for the first time in years. That happiness lasted exactly until I opened my apartment door and found David sitting in my living room. "How did you get in here?" I demanded. "Building manager let me in. I told him I was worried about you." "Get out." "Mom, we need to talk. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I made some mistakes." He looked terrible. Thinner than when I'd seen him last, with the hollow-eyed look of someone under serious stress. "Get out of my apartment, David. Just hear me out." 5 minutes. Please. Against my better judgment, I set down my weekend bag and crossed my arms. 5 minutes. "I know you're angry about the house. I get it. But Mom, I'm in real trouble now. The business thing didn't work out, and the people I owe money to, they're not patient like you were. That's not my problem anymore. They know where you live, Mom." The words hung in the air like a threat. My blood felt like ice water. "Are you threatening me?" "No. God, no. I'm trying to protect you. If you could just help me one more time, I can fix all of this." "How much?" 20,000. $20,000. More money than I had in the world. "I don't have $20,000. You could get it. You could take out a mortgage on this place, or get out." "Mom, you don't understand. These aren't nice people. They don't care that you're an old lady. Get out." I screamed it loud enough that Mrs. Chen's door opened across the hall. She took one look at David and stepped into the hallway. "Is everything okay, Marie?" David looked between us, his face flushing with anger. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything concerning my friend concerns me," Mrs. Chen said calmly. "Should I call building security, or will you leave on your own?" After David left, Mrs. Chen helped me check all my locks and gave me the number for an attorney who specialized in restraining orders. "Your son, he is dangerous now," she said. "Desperate people do desperate things." That night, I lay awake thinking about the little boy who used to collect shells on Rockaway Beach and the man who had just threatened me in my own home. How had I failed so completely? But then I caught myself. I hadn't failed. I had done my best with what I knew at the time. The failure was David's, not mine. The next morning, I called the attorney Mrs. Chen had recommended. Within a week, I had legal restraining orders against both of my children. Jessica hadn't threatened me, but her harassment had escalated to the point where I feared for my peace of mind if not my safety. The paperwork felt like divorce papers. I was divorcing my own children. But for the first time in years, I felt safe in my own home. Spring turned to summer. I developed routines that belonged only to me. Morning coffee by my window, afternoon walks in the neighborhood, evening tea with Mrs. Chen. I joined a book club at the library. I started volunteering at a local food bank. The work at the food bank opened my eyes. I met other older adults who had been taken advantage of by family members. I met people who had rebuilt their lives after devastating betrayals. I learned I wasn't alone in my experience. One woman, Patricia, had a story remarkably similar to mine. Her daughter had stolen her retirement savings through a series of manipulative schemes. The hardest part, Patricia told me, wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that the person I'd loved most in the world saw me as nothing but a resource to be exploited. But Patricia had rebuilt. She'd found community, purpose, peace. She showed me that recovery was possible. Summer faded to fall. I turned 74 in October, my first birthday in decades that I celebrated by choice rather than by obligation. Mrs. Chen made me a cake. The book club threw me a small party at the library. Patricia and I went to lunch at a nice restaurant overlooking the East River. It was the best birthday I'd had in years. Then, in November, everything changed again. I received a call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. "Mrs. Morrison, my name is James Parker. I represent Michael Castellano. I believe your son sold him some property earlier this year." My heart sank. "Yes. Mr. Castellano has been conducting some renovations on the property, and he's discovered something that belongs to you." "I'm sorry, what?" "Perhaps we could meet in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" The next day, I took the subway to a law office in Manhattan, my palms sweating despite the November cold. What could possibly be left for me to lose? James Parker was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and an expensive suit. He stood when I entered his office and shook my hand gently. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He handed me a business card and a manila envelope. "First, I need to apologize. My client, Mr. Castellano, had no idea when he purchased your property that your son hadn't properly informed you of the sale. I'm not sure I understand. Your son told Mr. Castellano that you were eager to sell, that you needed the money quickly for medical expenses, and that the low sale price was your idea to avoid tax complications." Each word felt like another stone in my chest. David had lied to everyone. Mr. Castellano is a contractor who specializes in historic renovations. He bought the property intending to restore it and flip it. But when he began work on the foundation, he made an unexpected discovery. Parker opened the manila envelope and pulled out several photographs. The photos showed my beach house's basement, floorboards pulled up, and underneath, gold. Bars and bars of gold, wrapped in waterproof cloth and hidden beneath my house for God knows how long. "We believe this was hidden during World War II, Parker explained. "There are records of Jewish families in the area burying valuables before they were forced to relocate. This property changed hands several times during the 1940s. I stared at the photographs, trying to process what I was seeing. "How much?" I whispered. "The current value is approximately $800,000. $800,000. Hidden beneath the house David had sold for $500. Legally, Parker continued, this belongs to you. You were the property owner when it was discovered, and there are no other viable claims." I started crying. Not from sadness this time, but from the cosmic irony of it all. My son had unknowingly saved his own life by selling my house. Because if I'd had access to $800,000 when he was threatening me and demanding $20,000, I might have been foolish enough to give it to him. And then he would have demanded more, and more, until it was all gone and I was back where I started. Instead, his own greed and betrayal had protected me from his future greed and manipulation. "Mrs. Morrison, are you all right?" I looked up at Parker through my tears. "I'm better than all right. I'm free." The money came through 6 weeks later, after various legal procedures and authentications. $800,000, plus interest from Mr. Castellano, who felt terrible about the circumstances of the purchase. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. The first thing I did was buy a small condo in Florida, near my brother Frank. A place with a view of the Gulf of Mexico where I could watch sunsets instead of sunrises, where the heat would ease my arthritis and the salt air would remind me of better days. The second thing I did was establish college funds for any children in my family's next generation who might want to pursue education without the burden of debt that had trapped their parents. The third thing I did was donate a substantial amount to organizations that help older adults protect themselves from financial abuse by family members. I kept enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, to travel, to enjoy good food and books and whatever simple pleasures I denied myself during all those years of sacrifice. Before I moved to Florida, David called me one last time. Somehow, he'd heard about the money. "Mom, I know we had our differences, but I've been thinking. Maybe I was too hasty about some things. Maybe we can work things out." His voice had that familiar desperate edge, but layered with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. "I'm proud of you for reaching out," I said calmly. "It shows growth. So you'll forgive me? We can put all this behind us?" "David, I forgave you months ago." Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending things didn't happen. It's about releasing my own anger so I can move forward. "Okay, good. So about helping me with this situation I'm in, I'm not giving you any money, David. Not now, not ever. But Mom, I'm your son." "Yes, you are. And I will always love the little boy you used to be. But I will never again enable the man you chose to become." "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you." Everything he'd done for me. Grand theft. Emotional manipulation. Threats. Harassment. "I'm very serious. I hope you find a way to build a life you're proud of, but you'll have to do it without my money." I hung up and unplugged my phone. Jessica tried reaching out through email and social media, her messages swinging between fury and manipulation. I blocked her on every platform. Some might say I was cruel. That family should forgive family no matter what. That blood is thicker than water. But I had learned something important in my 74th year: the blood of choice is thicker than the water of blood. The family you choose, the people who love you without conditions or expectations, matter more than the people who share your DNA but not your values. Mrs. Chen helped me pack for my move to Florida. She cried when we said goodbye, and so did I. "You call me every week," she said. "I want to hear about your new adventures." "I will. And you come visit me. I'll have a guest room with a view of the water. I would like that very much. My brother Frank met me at the airport in Tampa. I hadn't seen him in 5 years, but he looked at me and grinned. Marie, you look 10 years younger than the last time I saw you. I feel 20 years younger. My new condo was perfect. Small but comfortable, with a balcony that faced west toward the Gulf. Every evening, I could sit with a glass of wine and watch the sun melt into the water. I made friends quickly. Other retirees who had stories similar to mine, who had learned to build lives based on their own choices rather than other people's needs. I started painting, something I'd always wanted to try. My first attempts were terrible, but they were mine. Created for the joy of creation, not to please or appease anyone. 6 months after I moved to Florida, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Jessica. She wrote about missing me, about realizing she'd taken me for granted, about wanting to rebuild our relationship. The letter was beautifully written and might have been sincere. But it ended with a request for a loan to help her start a business. I threw the letter away unopened and went to sit on my balcony to watch the sunset. Some patterns never change. But I had changed, and that made all the difference. A year later, I was volunteering at a local shelter for older adults who had been financially abused by family members. My story had become a source of hope for others who thought it was too late to start over. One woman, around my age, listened to me speak and asked, "But don't you miss them? Don't you regret losing your children?" I thought about her question seriously before answering. "I miss the children I thought I had," I said. "I miss the relationship I thought we had. But I don't miss the constant anxiety, the manipulation, the feeling that I was never enough. I don't miss being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was." But aren't you lonely? I looked around the room at the other volunteers, people who had chosen to spend their time helping others heal from similar wounds. I thought about my weekly calls with Mrs. Chen, my monthly visits from Frank, my painting group, my book club. "I'm not lonely," I said. "I'm alone sometimes, but that's different. Loneliness is feeling disconnected even when you're surrounded by people. I felt lonely for years when I was constantly surrounded by family who saw me as a resource rather than a person. Now I'm connected to people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. That's not loneliness. That's peace." 2 years after moving to Florida, I decided to take a trip back to New York. Not to see David or Jessica, but to visit the old neighborhood, to see Mrs. Chen, to check on the friends I'd made at the food bank. I stayed in a nice hotel in Manhattan and spent a week being a tourist in the city where I'd lived most of my life. I saw Broadway shows, visited museums, ate at restaurants I'd always wanted to try but couldn't afford during my years of supporting selfish children. On my last day, I took the subway out to Rockaway Beach. I wanted to see what had become of my old house. The cottage was transformed. Mr. Castellano had restored it beautifully, adding a screened porch and updating the exterior while maintaining its essential character. A young family lived there now. I could see children's toys scattered in the yard, bicycles parked by the front steps. It looked loved. It looked like a home where children were being raised to understand the difference between being loved and being entitled. I stood on the sidewalk across the street for a long time, watching the house that had once been my sanctuary. I felt no regret, no sadness. Just gratitude that it was being cared for by people who appreciated what they had. A woman came out of the house, probably in her 30s, with a toddler on her hip. "Excuse me," she called to me. "Are you okay? You've been standing there for a while." I walked over to the fence. "I used to own this house. I just wanted to see how it looked." Her face lit up. "You're Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Castellano told us about you. He said you used to love this place." "I did. It looks beautiful. You've taken wonderful care of it. Would you like to come in? See what we've done with it?" I almost declined, but something in her genuine warmth reminded me of my younger self, back when I still believed in the basic goodness of people. The interior was transformed but familiar. They'd opened up walls, added modern conveniences, but the bones of the house were the same. The view of the ocean from the living room window still took my breath away. "Mr. Castellano told us what happened," the woman said gently. "About your son and the sale. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. If it hadn't happened, I never would have learned who I really was under all those years of trying to be who others needed me to be." She made coffee, and we sat in what used to be my kitchen, watching her toddler play with wooden blocks on the floor. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course. Do you ever hear from your children? Do they know about the money?" "They know. And they've tried to reconnect. But their attempts always come with financial requests attached. After a while, you realize that some people are only interested in relationships that benefit them. That must be heartbreaking." I considered her words. It was, for a long time. But now I think it's just reality. Some people are takers, some are givers, and some have learned to be both. My children never learned to be both. Do you think they ever will? Maybe. But that's not my responsibility anymore. My responsibility is to myself, to the people who genuinely care about me, and to using whatever time I have left in ways that bring me joy. Before I left, the woman asked if I'd like to have dinner with her family sometime when I was in town. Just because, she added. Not because we need anything. Just because you seem like someone we'd enjoy knowing. Just because. The words that had started my healing journey with Mrs. Chen. I accepted the invitation and meant it. On the train back to the city, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years ago, I had been a bitter, exploited woman whose greatest fear was dying alone. Now I was someone who had chosen her own family, built her own life, and found peace in her own company. The gold hidden beneath my house had given me financial freedom. But the real treasure had been learning to value myself enough to walk away from people who didn't. I thought about David and Jessica sometimes. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant sadness, the way you might feel about characters in a tragic story. They were still out there somewhere, probably still blaming me for their problems, still looking for someone else to solve their latest crisis. I hoped they would find their way to better lives. I hoped they would learn to build relationships based on mutual care rather than exploitation. But I no longer felt responsible for teaching them those lessons. Some people, I had learned, will only respect you when disrespecting you becomes too expensive. For my children, I had made disrespecting me very expensive indeed. The train pulled into Penn Station, and I gathered my belongings. Tomorrow I would fly back to Florida, back to my sunset balcony, back to my chosen family of friends who loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide. As I walked through the station, surrounded by rushing commuters and tourists, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Mrs. Chen, who had shown me what genuine friendship looked like. Gratitude for my brother Frank, who had never asked me for anything but company. Gratitude for the volunteers at the shelter, who had taught me that helping others didn't require sacrificing yourself. And yes, even gratitude for David and Jessica, who had taught me the difference between love and exploitation, between forgiveness and enabling. Their betrayal had been the push I needed to discover who I was when I wasn't busy trying to be everything to everyone. 6 months later, I was sitting on my balcony watching another Florida sunset when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer it. Grandma Marie? A young voice I didn't recognize. Male, maybe early 20s. I'm sorry, who is this? It's Tommy, Jessica's son. I know you probably don't want to talk to anyone in the family, but I wanted to call you. Jessica's son. My grandson, who I'd seen maybe a dozen times in his life because Jessica had always been too busy to maintain relationships that didn't serve her immediate needs. Tommy. You must be, what, 22 now? 23. I'm graduating from college next month. I felt a pang of something. Not guilt, exactly, but regret that I'd missed so much of his life. Congratulations. That's wonderful. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For the college fund. I didn't know about it until recently, when the financial aid office told me an anonymous donor had paid off my remaining tuition. The college funds I'd established. I'd made them anonymous specifically to avoid this kind of contact, but administrative systems aren't always perfect. I don't know what you mean, I said gently. Grandma, I know it was you. And I know why you did it anonymously. Mom told me some of what happened, though I'm sure her version wasn't entirely accurate. Smart boy. What do you think happened? I think my mom and uncle spent years taking advantage of someone who loved them, and when they finally pushed too far, they lost the best thing in their lives. I felt tears starting. Tommy, I want you to know that some of us turned out different. Some of us learned different lessons from watching how our parents treat people. Tell me about yourself, I said. Tell me who you are. We talked for 2 hours. Tommy was studying social work, planning to help older adults protect themselves from financial abuse. He worked part-time at a nonprofit, volunteered at a food bank, had never asked his mother for money. He had learned, somehow, to be both a taker and a giver. Would you like to visit me sometime? I asked. Just to visit. No agenda, no complications. I would love that. 2 months later, Tommy came to Florida for a long weekend. He was tall and thin like David had been at that age, but his eyes were different. They held kindness instead of calculation. We walked on the beach, cooked together, talked about books and ideas and dreams. He asked about his grandfather Robert, wanted to know family stories I'd almost forgotten. On his last evening, we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. Can I ask you something personal? He said. Of course. Do you ever think about forgiving Mom and Uncle David? letting them back into your life? I'd been asked this question many times, but never by someone whose opinion mattered to me the way Tommy's did. What would forgiveness look like to you? I asked. I don't know. Maybe, giving them another chance? Tommy, I forgave them a long time ago. Forgiveness doesn't mean putting yourself back in a position to be hurt again. It means releasing the anger so you can move forward. But don't you miss having a family? I gestured around the balcony, where photos showed my life in Florida. Pictures of friends, of Frank, of Mrs. Chen during her visit, of Tommy himself from earlier that day. I have a family. I have people who love me without conditions, who enjoy my company without expecting payment, who ask about my day because they genuinely care about the answer. But we're your blood family. Blood family is the family you're born into. Real family is the family that chooses to love you and act like it every day. He was quiet for a while, watching the sun disappear into the Gulf. I understand why you can't trust them again, he said finally. But it makes me sad that their choices cost the rest of us the chance to know you. It doesn't have to cost you anything. You're here now. You chose to find me, to reach out, to build something between us. That's what family really means. Tommy started visiting regularly after that. Every few months, he'd come to Florida for a weekend, or I'd fly up to see him in New York. We built a relationship based on mutual affection and respect, with no financial component at all. He never asked me for money. I never offered any beyond paying for dinner when we went out together. Our relationship existed in that pure space where love isn't confused with transaction. Through Tommy, I learned that it was possible to maintain connection with my bloodline without subjecting myself to exploitation. I could have the joy of grandmotherhood without the manipulation I'd experienced as a mother. 3 years after moving to Florida, I received a letter that changed everything once again. It was from a law office in Manhattan, informing me that David had died. Heart attack at 41. Sudden and massive. No warning. I read the letter 3 times before the information really sank in. My youngest child, the little boy who used to collect shells on Rockaway Beach, was gone. The funeral was the following Tuesday. Jessica called to tell me about it, her voice hollow with grief. I know you probably won't come, she said. But I thought you should know. I'll be there, I said. I flew to New York that Monday and stayed in the same Manhattan hotel I'd used for my visit 2 years earlier. Tuesday morning, I put on my darkest dress and took a taxi to the funeral home in Queens. The service was small. Jessica and her family. A few people I didn't recognize, probably friends or business associates. And me. I sat in the back, unsure of my welcome but unable to stay away. Jessica spoke about David's dreams, his ambitions, his struggles. She painted a picture of a man who had been misunderstood, who had died before he could fulfill his potential. She didn't mention the theft, the threats, or the years of manipulation. But I didn't expect her to. Funerals are for the living, and sometimes the living need their narratives more than they need the truth. After the service, Jessica approached me cautiously. I wasn't sure you'd come. He was my son. Whatever else happened between us, he was my son. She started crying then, and I held her while she sobbed against my shoulder. For those few minutes, she felt like my little girl again instead of the woman who had helped enable her brother's abuse. I miss him so much, she whispered. And I miss you. I know. Could we maybe try to work things out? Start over? I pulled back and looked at her tear-stained face. She looked older than her 45 years, worn down by stress and poor choices. Jessica, I need you to understand something. I loved you both completely, but I won't go back to the way things were. I don't want money, if that's what you think. It's not about the money. It's about respect. It's about being valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I do value you. Then prove it. Show me what that looks like without any financial component. Show me what a relationship with your mother looks like when you're not asking for anything. We exchanged phone numbers, and I told her I'd be willing to try if she was genuinely committed to change. Over the following months, Jessica did try. She called regularly just to talk. She sent cards on holidays. She asked about my life in Florida with what seemed like genuine interest. But slowly, the old patterns started creeping back. The conversations began shifting toward her problems, her struggles, her need for advice that always seemed to lead toward requests for financial help. 6 months after David's funeral, she finally asked directly. A small loan to help with some unexpected expenses. Jessica, I said gently, this is exactly what I was afraid of. It's just temporary help. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. The same words David had used. The same justifications. The same underlying assumption that my role in her life was to solve her problems. I can't do this again, I said. You'd rather have no relationship with your remaining child than help me through a rough patch. I'd rather have no relationship than have a relationship based on me being your emergency fund. She hung up angry, and we didn't speak again for a long time. I grieved for her, just as I had grieved for David while he was still alive. I grieved for the relationships we might have had if they had learned to see me as a person rather than a resource. But I didn't regret my decision. Peace was more valuable than the illusion of family connection. Tommy continued to be a bright spot in my life. His visits became more frequent, and he brought friends sometimes, young people who were interested in my stories about New York in the 70s and 80s. Through Tommy, I became connected to a world of young adults who were thoughtful, engaged, and kind. They reminded me that each generation contains people of all types, that the capacity for both selfishness and generosity exists in every age group. I started mentoring some of Tommy's friends who were studying social work, sharing my experiences from both sides of the exploitation equation. My story became a case study in their classes, an example of how financial abuse can happen even in loving families. It felt good to turn my pain into purpose. For years after David's death, I received an unexpected call from Jessica. Her voice was different. Quieter. More thoughtful. "Mom, I've been in therapy for the past year," she said. "I'm calling to apologize." I listened while she talked about recognizing patterns in her relationships, understanding how she'd learned to manipulate people to get her needs met, realizing how much damage she'd done to our relationship. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did wrong. I forgave you a long time ago, Jessica. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I know. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that some of us can learn, even if it takes longer than it should." We started talking again, carefully at first. But this time felt different. Jessica asked about my life without trying to find angles for her own benefit. She shared stories about her own growth without using them as setups for requests. Slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding something that resembled a healthy relationship. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of when she was small. Too much water had passed under that bridge. But it was something honest, something based on mutual respect rather than obligation. She never asked for money again. I never offered any. On my 80th birthday, Jessica flew to Florida for a small celebration. Tommy came too, bringing his new girlfriend, who turned out to be as lovely as he described. We had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. As the sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jessica raised her wine glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "And to the strongest woman I know." I thought about all the years that had led to this moment. The betrayal and theft that had seemed like the end of my world. The loneliness and grief that had nearly consumed me. The slow, difficult work of rebuilding my life around my own values rather than other people's needs. "To survival," I said. "And to the family we choose." We clinked glasses as the last light faded from the sky. Later that evening, after Jessica and Tommy and his girlfriend had gone back to their hotel, I sat alone on my balcony with a cup of tea. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and night-blooming jasmine. I thought about Robert, gone now for 15 years. I thought about the woman I'd been when he died, so eager to please, so afraid of being alone that I'd tolerated treatment I never should have accepted. I thought about Mrs. Chen, now 89 and still calling me every Sunday from her apartment in Queens. I thought about Frank, who'd passed away 2 years earlier but had lived to see me happy and settled in Florida. I thought about David, whose greed and betrayal had inadvertently led to my liberation and financial security. And I thought about the gold buried beneath that little beach house, hidden for decades until just the right moment to change everything. Life, I reflected, has a strange sense of timing and justice. Sometimes the very actions that someone takes to hurt you become the catalyst for your greatest transformation. If David hadn't sold my house, I might have remained trapped in patterns of enabling and exploitation for the rest of my life. His betrayal had been a gift, disguised as devastation. The money was nice, of course. Financial security had allowed me to build a new life without worry about basic needs. But the real treasure hadn't been the gold under the floorboards. The real treasure had been learning that I was worth more than what I could provide to others. I finished my tea and went inside to prepare for bed. Tomorrow, I was starting a painting class at the community center. Next week, I was flying to visit Tommy in New York. Next month, I was taking a cruise to Alaska with 3 friends I'd met at the volunteer shelter. My calendar was full of activities I'd chosen, people I enjoyed, experiences I looked forward to. At 80 years old, I was living the life I'd always wanted but never believed I deserved. As I turned off the lights and headed toward my bedroom, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The reflection showed an older woman with silver hair and lined skin, but also bright eyes and straight shoulders. I looked like someone who knew her own worth. Someone who had learned the difference between love and transaction. Someone who had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger on the other side. I smiled at my reflection and went to bed, ready for whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. Because I had finally learned the most important lesson of all, the only person responsible for my happiness was me. And I was more than capable of creating a life worth living. The gold below the floorboards had saved my life, but not in the way you might expect. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the timing. It was the way the universe had protected me from my own generous nature until I was strong enough to protect myself. Some treasures are buried for a reason. They wait until we're ready to handle them. Some lessons can only be learned through hardship. Some families are chosen rather than inherited. And sometimes, the end of one story is actually the beginning of the one you were always meant to live. As I drifted off to sleep in my comfortable Florida home, surrounded by photos of people who genuinely loved me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: complete peace. Not the fragile peace of someone desperately trying to avoid conflict, but the deep, unshakable peace of someone who had finally learned to value herself. The next morning, I woke up naturally as sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows. No alarm clock needed anymore. My days belonged to me now, structured around my own desires and interests rather than other people's crises. I made coffee and stepped onto my balcony, breathing in the salt air and watching pelicans skim the surface of the Gulf. In a few hours, I would meet my painting group at the community center. Later, I was having lunch with Eleanor, a former teacher who had become one of my closest friends here in Florida. But first, I wanted to spend some time writing. Over the past few months, I'd been working on a memoir. Not for publication necessarily, but for the therapeutic value of putting my story into words. And maybe, just maybe, to help other people who might find themselves in similar situations. I'd learned through my volunteer work that my story wasn't unique. Financial abuse by adult children was more common than people realized. Many older adults suffered in silence, too embarrassed to admit that the children they'd sacrificed everything for had turned against them. I settled into my writing chair with my coffee and opened my laptop. Chapter 12 was about the day I discovered David had sold my house. Even now, 3 years later, it was difficult to write about. But I forced myself to capture every detail, every emotion, every moment of that devastating discovery. Because someone else needed to read it. Someone else needed to know they weren't alone, that recovery was possible, that life could be beautiful after betrayal. My phone rang, interrupting my writing. It was Tommy. "Good morning, Grandma. How are you feeling today?" "Wonderful," I said, and meant it. I was just working on my book. "The memoir? How's it coming along?" "Slowly but surely. It's harder than I expected, reliving some of those moments. But important work," he said gently. "Your story could help a lot of people." That's what I keep telling myself when the writing gets difficult. We chatted for a few more minutes. He told me about a project he was working on at the nonprofit, a support group for older adults who had experienced financial abuse by family members. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. My grandson was now helping people in situations similar to the one his uncle had created. "I love you, Grandma," he said before hanging up. "I love you too, sweetheart." 3 simple words that meant everything because they came without conditions, without expectations, without hidden agendas. I returned to my writing, but my mind wandered to my old life in Queens. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd never discovered the strength to say no. If I'd continued enabling David and Jessica until I had nothing left to give. The answer was clear: I would have died bitter, broke, and alone, having sacrificed my own happiness for people who saw me as nothing more than a resource. Instead, I was thriving. I had enough money to live comfortably, friends who valued my company, and most importantly, self-respect I'd never known I was missing. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was my neighbor Caroline, holding a plate of freshly baked muffins. "Morning, Marie. I made too many blueberry muffins again. Thought you might like some." Caroline was 76, a widow who had moved to Florida after her husband passed away. She was one of those naturally generous people who gave because it brought them joy, not because they hoped for something in return. "You're an angel," I said, accepting the muffins. "Would you like some coffee?" I was just taking a break from writing. We sat on my balcony, eating warm muffins and watching boats dot the horizon. This was contentment, I realized. Simple pleasures shared with someone who asked for nothing but companionship. "How's the memoir coming along?" Caroline asked. I'd shared my story with Caroline months earlier, during one of our many conversations about life, love, and loss. "It's therapeutic," I said. "And terrifying. But I think it needs to be written." "Your story will help people," she said firmly. I know it would have helped my sister. She went through something similar with her son. We talked for an hour about family, forgiveness, and the strange turns life can take. When Caroline left, I felt energized and ready to tackle the difficult chapter I'd been avoiding, the day David had threatened me in my own apartment. I wrote steadily until it was time to leave for my painting class. Art had become one of my greatest discoveries in this new life. I had no natural talent, but I loved the process of creating something with my own hands, something that belonged only to me. Our instructor, Maria, was a patient woman in her 60s who believed that art was about expression, not perfection. Today we were working on seascapes, which seemed appropriate given my view of the Gulf. Remember, Maria said as we set up our easels, you're not trying to photograph the ocean. You're trying to capture how it makes you feel. How did the ocean make me feel? Safe, peaceful, free. Those were the emotions I tried to capture in brushstrokes, mixing blues and greens and whites until they seemed to move on the canvas like living water. After class, I met Eleanor for lunch at our favorite cafe. Eleanor was 82, sharp as a tack, and had never married. She'd spent her career traveling the world as a journalist, collecting stories and experiences instead of children and grandchildren. I never understood why people pitted me for not having children, she said during one of our early conversations. I chose the life I wanted. I have no regrets. Eleanor had become something of a mentor to me, showing me that a woman could be complete without defining herself through her relationships to others. She was proof that aging could mean freedom rather than diminishment. How's Jessica doing? Eleanor asked as we shared a key lime pie. I updated her on Jessica's progress, the therapy, the gradual rebuilding of trust between us. Do you think she's really changed? Eleanor asked. I think she wants to change, I said carefully. Whether that desire is strong enough to overcome decades of learned behavior remains to be seen. But I'm willing to give her the chance to prove it. And if she disappoints you again? Then I'll know I tried. And I'll be fine either way. That was the truth. 3 years of building my own life had given me the confidence to engage with Jessica without fear. If she genuinely changed, wonderful. If she didn't, I had plenty of other sources of love and fulfillment. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The phone rang, Mrs. Chen, right on schedule for our Sunday call. Marie, how are you, dear? I'm wonderful, Mrs. Chen. How are you feeling? We talked for 30 minutes about her week, her health, her great-grandchildren. She was considering moving to an assisted living facility, not because she needed the help yet, but because she wanted to plan ahead. I don't want to burden my children, she said. I've seen what happens to families when children have to become caregivers. It changes the relationship. Mrs. Chen's wisdom never ceased to amaze me. Even at 89, she was still thinking ahead, still making choices based on love rather than need. After we hung up, I thought about my own future. I was healthy and independent now, but that wouldn't last forever. I'd made my own plans, a good long-term care insurance policy, a living will, arrangements for my assets to go to charities and educational funds after my death. I wouldn't burden anyone with my care. I wouldn't become a pawn in family power struggles. I'd learned too much about the importance of boundaries to abandon them in my final years. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The pain had been real, the betrayal devastating. But without it, I never would have discovered my own strength. I'd spent the first 73 years of my life trying to be what others needed me to be. The remaining years would be spent being exactly who I was meant to be, a woman of depth, wisdom, and hard-earned peace. The next morning brought news that would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness and boundaries. Jessica called, crying. Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm in trouble. My first instinct was the familiar clench of anxiety, the maternal urge to drop everything and fix whatever was wrong. But I'd learned to pause, to breathe, to respond rather than react. What kind of trouble, Jessica? Financial trouble. But Mom, before you say anything, I'm not asking you for money. I just need someone to talk to, and my therapist is out of town. I listened as she explained the situation. She'd invested in a business venture that had fallen through, leaving her with significant debt. She was scared, ashamed, and facing some difficult decisions about her future. What are your options? I asked. I could sell my house, move to something smaller. Get a second job. File for bankruptcy if it comes to that. These were adult solutions. Responsible choices. Not the desperate schemes David used to propose. Those all sound like reasonable options, I said. What's holding you back? I'm embarrassed. I'm almost 50 years old, and I feel like I'm starting over from scratch. Starting over isn't a failure, Jessica. It's a choice. Sometimes it's the bravest choice you can make. We talked for another hour about practical steps she could take, resources available to help her navigate the financial difficulties. I offered emotional support and encouragement, but no money. She didn't ask for any. When we hung up, I realized something significant had just happened. Jessica had come to me in crisis and allowed me to be what she actually needed, a mother who listened, advised, and supported without solving her problems for her. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. That afternoon, I returned to my memoir, writing about the importance of boundaries, about the difference between helping and enabling. The words flowed more easily now, infused with hope rather than just pain. I wrote about Mrs. Chen's friendship, about Frank's unwavering support, about Tommy's genuine love. I wrote about painting classes and volunteer work and sunset dinners with friends who chose to be in my life. I wrote about discovering that family isn't just about blood, it's about people who show up when they say they will, who celebrate your joy and share your sorrows, who see your worth beyond your usefulness. As the weeks passed, I fell into a comfortable rhythm with my new life. Mornings were for writing, afternoons for friends and activities, evenings for quiet reflection on my balcony. I was busier than I'd been in years, but it was a different kind of busy, full of chosen activities rather than crisis management. Jessica called every few weeks, updating me on her progress. She'd found a second job, put her house on the market, and was working with a financial counselor to develop a debt repayment plan. She never asked for money. She never made her problems my emergency. "I think I'm finally learning what you tried to teach me," she said during one call. "That I'm capable of solving my own problems." "You always were capable," I replied. "You just needed to believe it yourself." Tommy visited again in the spring, this time bringing a surprise. His fiancée wanted my approval to use my key lime pie recipe for their wedding reception. It was such a normal, loving family moment that it made me tear up. "Of course," I said. "I'll teach you how to make it." We spent a weekend cooking together, 3 generations in my Florida kitchen, laughing and sharing stories and creating new memories. This was what family was supposed to feel like: joyful, supportive, uncomplicated. That summer, I finished my memoir. 150 pages of raw truth about love, betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption. I titled it, Hidden Gold, Finding Treasure After Betrayal. Eleanor convinced me to look into publishing it. "Your story matters, Marie. It could help thousands of people who are suffering in silence." The publishing process was daunting for a woman my age, but I'd learned not to let fear make my decisions for me. I found a small publisher that specialized in memoirs about overcoming adversity. 6 months later, I held my published book in my hands. My story, bound in a real book with my name on the cover. The first review appeared online a few weeks after publication. It was from a woman named Dorothy, age 78. "This book saved my life. I was trapped in the same cycle of enabling my adult children's bad choices, and I thought I was too old to change. Marie's story showed me that it's never too late to choose yourself. I've started saying no, and for the first time in decades, I'm at peace. Thank you, Marie, for having the courage to share your truth." More reviews followed. Stories from other older adults who had found themselves in similar situations. Stories of transformation, of boundaries set, of lives reclaimed. My pain had become purpose. My story was helping people find their own strength. The book attracted media attention. Local newspapers wanted interviews. A national morning show invited me to appear via video call from my Florida home. "What advice would you give to other older adults who are being financially abused by family members?" the host asked. "First, know that you're not alone," I said. "This happens more often than people want to admit. Second, understand that saying no to people you love is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself. And finally, remember that you are worth more than what you can provide to others. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can give." After the interview, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, processing the surreal experience of having my story broadcast to millions of people. The woman who had once been too intimidated to speak up to her own children had just shared her experiences with a national audience. The phone rang. It was Jessica. "Mom, I saw your interview. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, sweetheart. I want you to know that I understand now. What you did, cutting us off, protecting yourself, it wasn't cruel. It was necessary. And it worked. I'm a better person because you forced me to become responsible for my own life. I'm proud of you too, Jessica, for doing the hard work of changing. Would you be willing to come to my new place for Christmas? It's not much, a small apartment, but I'd love to cook dinner for you." Christmas with Jessica. A year ago, I would never have imagined that possibility. "I'd like that," I said. That December, I flew to New York for Christmas with Jessica and Tommy. Jessica's apartment was indeed small, but it was clean and cheerful, decorated with handmade ornaments and filled with the aroma of roasting turkey. We cooked together, sharing stories and laughing at burnt rolls and overcooked vegetables. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a family choice rather than a family obligation. Tommy gave a toast before dinner, to second chances, hard-earned wisdom, and the strongest grandmother I know. As I looked around that small table, at Jessica, who was learning to be responsible, at Tommy, who had never needed to learn because he'd been raised with boundaries, at myself, older but wiser, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because my family was perfect now, but because I was perfect as I was. Complete in myself, capable of love without expectation, strong enough to walk away from toxicity and wise enough to recognize genuine change. The gold buried beneath my old house had given me financial freedom. But the real treasure had been learning that I was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth loving, worth celebrating. At 81 years old, I was living proof that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to set boundaries, never too late to discover who you really are when you stop trying to be everything to everyone. As we cleared dishes that Christmas evening, Jessica pulled me aside. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Not just for the money and the manipulation, but for making you feel like you weren't enough just as you were. You were always enough. More than enough. I was just too selfish to see it." "Thank you," I said simply. Because sometimes the greatest gift is acknowledgement, recognition, the validation that your truth is real and your worth is inherent. That night, lying in Jessica's guest room, I thought about Robert. I wished he could see what had become of our little family, broken and rebuilt, scarred but stronger, different than we'd dreamed but somehow exactly what we all needed. I thought about David, gone these 4 years now. I hoped he'd found peace, wherever he was. I would always love the little boy he'd been, even while rejecting the destructive man he'd become. And I thought about myself, the frightened, desperate woman who had once sat in a queen's apartment, surrounded by legal papers that seemed to spell the end of everything she held dear. That woman couldn't have imagined this ending. Successful author, beloved grandmother, woman of means and independence, surrounded by chosen family and earned respect. She couldn't have imagined that the worst thing that ever happened to her would become the catalyst for the best years of her life. But life, I'd learned, has a way of surprising us. The treasures we find are rarely the ones we were looking for. The gold beneath the floorboards of our existence often stays hidden until we're ready to handle its weight. Some gifts come disguised as loss. Some freedom looks like abandonment. Some love requires the courage to walk away. As I drifted off to sleep in my daughter's apartment, grateful for the complicated beauty of second chances and earned redemption, I smiled at the thought that my story was far from over. At 81, I was still discovering who I was meant to be. Still writing new chapters, still opening my heart, still choosing myself every single day. The hidden gold hadn't just been buried beneath my house. It had been buried within me all along, waiting for the right moment to surface, waiting for me to become brave enough to claim it. And now that I had, nothing could take it away. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you found yourself giving everything to people who took you for granted? Sometimes the people closest to us can't see our worth until we're brave enough to walk away. I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories of resilience and hope. Together, we can remind each other that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand respect, and to build the life you truly deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of survivors and thrivers. And remember, you are worth more than what you can give to others. You are worth more than your usefulness. You are worth love that asks for nothing in return except the joy of loving you. Until next time, choose yourself. You're worth it.